let's get to the reason why we're all here is to listen to two experts. And our first expert is Walter Kraus. Walter's a PEng and a CSRP. He's principal at Efficient to Sustainable Inc., a consulting company that works with Altech. He formerly was, I think you were the VP Environment. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Walter. At Weston Foods, but he's worked at Weston Foods since 1989, doing lots of environmental stuff. So he's going to give us both the consulting view from his perspective and the industry view. So please join me. We don't have to clap because you're on mute, but I'll clap in welcoming Walter.
All right, thank you, John. I'm pleased to partner again with Altech to deliver this informative webinar. I think I did a couple early on wastewater and source reduction, which were very fun to do. My contact details are held on the screen here. Sorry, and you have my bio. John mentioned it briefly, and it's in the invitation. So again, I'm happy to be working with. So I'm going to give you my perspective.
Sorry, Walter, before you go on, I'm having a hard time hearing you. I think it gets cut off slightly. I'm not sure if others are experiencing the same.
I'll speak slowly.
That's better. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to be sharing my perspective on environmental management systems and sort of the elements that go into an EMS. Not necessarily from an ISO standpoint, but from I think what is generally common for most companies where they need or have an existing environmental management system, and just want to make sure that that they're meeting, that they're protecting the business sufficiently. So for those that have an ISO 14001 framework, the requirements and the cadence for the EMS is very well prescribed. And having an EMS is, again, an essential requirement, not only for due diligence, but frankly, and we're experiencing this day in and day out, customers are requesting it. They want to have evidence of good governance on the part of people that they are partnering with. But furthermore, and this is what I experienced in my previous lives, the internal audit department has become interested in evaluating the performance of, they usually say, okay, they worry about financial performance, but they've become interested in the performance of the environmental departments to ensure that they are representing and protecting the business well. And so they have been using ISO 14000 in a shadow approach to kind of guide departments and make sure that they are covering the necessary bases. So for those that have their own EMS or interested in upgrading their EMS, this simplified chart is on the screen, which everybody is aware of. It's the continuous improvement cycle, plan, do, check, act, which lends itself to the development and maintenance of an EMS. And so in the top left, the planning function involves performing a regulatory applicability study. You need to know what you need to follow, and then second of all is doing an entity level and facility level risk assessment, so that you can then determine how these regulations really sit within your organization and what are the risks. From that, you can start building or updating roles and responsibilities within your organization. These are not necessarily dedicated roles. They could be, but generally there's elements that are always added to someone else's existing job. You can then develop and update standard operating procedures or work instructions, and then provide current and relevant training to your staff to ensure that they know exactly what needs to be done and when. And once you do that, the manner which most people check their performance is through an audit function. And again, depending on the resources that you have available, the audit function may be driven internally through your own department. It could be driven by the internal audit department or some external kind of group within your organization. or you may turn to a third party to provide a more independent assessment of how you're performing against the requirements. These generally will result in the identification of deficiencies, and that will then require you to create corrective and preventative action plans. Once an audit is closed, you've dealt with everything, you can then take that information and use it to update your entity and facility level risk assessment, as well as your regulatory applicability, and you can start the process all over again. In my previous life, this was basically an annual cadence that we went through. December, January was the time where we sort of collected everything that we made note of over the course of the year, and I'll show you how we did that, and then started the process over again. And this provided a good comfort to the business and to the leadership that we were on top of things. So the balance of my talk is going to focus on the top left of the screen, planning function. So a regulatory applicability review is an essential piece, an essential requirement to identify and prioritize those compliance items that are most relevant to your operation. All of these sources that I'm listing up here can give you the pieces to allow you to do that review. But the fact of the matter is that some of these pieces, especially in today's sort of very unique times, some pieces are not available or very limited in their nature. For example, conferences and peer groups are either not being held, they're postponed, or they're being held online. And in those types of situations, you have no ability to network with your peers, to get into the details of an issue that might potentially impact your business. So there's no opportunity to engage. Trade journals will provide a high-level summary of pending regulatory updates, but that's usually intended for broad audiences, and they might not necessarily take into account the uniqueness of your operation. Government websites, consultations are essentially being done online now. They do require a lot of review and a lot of grunt work on your part to sort of cross-reference against your business and then interpret whether it's actually there are third-party websites and third-party businesses that will provide you with regulatory updates, but again, it requires you to go in and filter through what may apply to your business, and the interpretation is also. So what is a certainty is that if you're embarking on a regulatory applicability review for the first time, it will be a significant effort. But in subsequent years, it does get easier. There isn't a lot of regulatory churn on the environmental piece. It does, ebb and flow, but it does lay a good groundwork for you to continue to sort of stay on top of the things that can come up and bite your business. So in my previous life, we created a regulatory issues register. It was useful for us because we were reporting to an executive and a board level committee on a periodic basis. It was allowing us to track basically what are the regulations that regulatory issues that are popping up, and whether they apply, may apply, or don't apply to our business. And so if we deemed that they didn't apply to our business, that was noted, and we would move on. If it had a potential of applying to our business, we would need to investigate further. We would put that on our radar, and we would either look for more information. I don't know why it's popped. Look for more information, or just wait for more information to be released. And if it did apply to our business, we would put in plans in place to comply, ideally before something was actually implemented or became in effect. So Noor's presentation ties very well into this because he'll provide, what I would say is a very clear approach to tracking regulatory updates. So again, I use this register to inform company leadership, our board. It demonstrated that my functional team was on top of the issues, And frankly, one of our sort of unwritten job, descriptions was that we were to look around the corner for our business and see what was waiting for us. So that would allow us to move on to an entity and facility level risk assessment. So this is a structure that was put in place after working with the internal audit department, and it allowed us to set a structure in place to evaluate the business as a whole, and then look right down into the individual operating units in our network and see how they were performing against these risks. And then from that, we could determine what level of oversight did the environmental department need in order to ensure continuing compliance. So this was an annual cadence that we did. It was led by the regulations that we obviously compiled over the years and that we're staying on top of. And we would review this every year and make changes as required. So we started with looking at the individual environmental categories. Again, this is at at a high level over the entire company. If you're a single plant operation, then you can combine these things. We will just call it an entity risk assessment. But we looked at each category one by one, and within that category, based on our regulatory applicability reviews, we identified key environmental risks under each category, whether they be regulatory or non-regulatory. And we included non-regulatory because these were things that could lead to a regulatory issue. So we wanted to sort of take one step back and make sure we had those covered. We would then assign a rating. We met as a team and we would look at the severity and likelihood of each of these risks manifesting themselves in the company, and whether those risks were either high, medium, or low. And then we would use a simple 3x3 assessment matrix to land on a single risk rating for that category. And if it was, and we converted it to a numerical unit. So if it was deemed to be high risk to the business, for example, air management, air compliance with air regulations was deemed to be high for the company, we assigned it a number 3 risk. And that we did for every category across the business as a whole. But then we took it down into the individual operating unit levels. And so what we did there is we looked at each category and how the operation was performing against that category, again, from a high, medium, and low standpoint. And that provided a score. We then took each score for that operating unit and multiplied it by the weighting that we provided in the entity level piece. So for air emissions, we knew that it was a high risk, and that was a level 3. Here, the operation at Mississauga, for example, had a level 3. We would multiply that to give us a 9. We did that for each of the categories, and then basically in column T, we added everything up, and that provided a total score for that facility. And then looking at our departmental resources, getting the buy-in from our internal audit department, we settled on some ranges where we would divide facilities up into a low, medium, or high risk category. And that would have just been fine for us. We could then sort of set our audit cadence based on those ratings. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to provide a little bit more accountability or account for, this is a better term, for some local operating conditions that might cause the risks to be, make the facility more vulnerable to those risks. And that would be things like, was there a change in operating personnel there? Do we have any gaps in management? Are there positions, key environmental compliance positions that are open, not filled? How did the facility perform in their last compliance? What's the trend there? So if there is any of these negative trends occurring, that would allow us to subjectively make an adjustment to the risk rating that was
Walter.
Yes, sir.
Walter, you're fading in and out. So can you be careful on your mic? I think it might be your a loose mic, or I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
Tends to fade in and out.
Sorry.
Because you're saying important stuff. I want to hear it.
Okay. Apologies for that.
No worries.
The lights aren't flickering, so the connection should be good. So, you know, where we arrived at a risk rating for a facility, the bottom line is we would make adjustments based on local site conditions. And that was just to, you know, err on the side of caution and make sure that we weren't letting any potential issues creep up on us. So more often than not, you know, if there was an adjustment made, it would be to elevate the risk level for a facility. And so you'll see, you know, to the far right, you'll see a series of numbers there. And basically, if you were assessed as a low risk facility, you were placed in an audit frequency of every 4 years. If you were deemed to be a medium risk facility, you were audited every 2 years. And if you're a high risk, you would be audited every year. And again, these things did not change much year over year. You know, fortunately, you know, we wouldn't have a lot of sort of the local issues pop up. But getting here was certainly, you know, it was a long haul to get here, but it was a worthwhile haul, in my opinion, because the sign of a good assessment, any assessment for that matter, is anyone should be able to pick up that assessment and understand exactly how the conclusions were arrived at. So this clearly sort of shows the rationale for arriving at the audit and risk levels. So a regulatory basis is essential because that is the sort of the #1 activity from a planning standpoint. Taking that regulatory information and then putting it in the form of an entity and facility level risk assessment helps visualize and prioritize where your operating risks are. You use that information to build your work instructions, your SOPs, to create your roles or add to existing roles with new responsibilities, and train the people so that they know exactly what they need to do in their roles. You use your audit program to check on your performance, to find gaps, and you make the adjustments, you do the corrective actions and preventative actions, and then you take those learnings and you feed that back into your regulatory registers as well as your entity and facility level risk assessments. And that's basically the circle that you live by. And we used an annual cadence. Obviously, it's going to depend on your internal resource levels and whether you have the luxury, the ability to call on for help. But this has served my previous lives well, and this is certainly what I am recommending when I work with other companies. So I'll turn it over to Noor so that he can now give you a lot more detail on some of the things that Altech can help you with.
Thank you, Walter. I'm going to take a moment to share my screen. John, can you see my screen right now?
No, I don't see. It's okay. Here it comes. It's coming now. Now I can. Are you in a bubble? And it says Lenovo. Are you using a Lenovo?
Yes.
Is that you in that bubble?
That's me. I've been in there for
Why don't you ever invite me out there? Okay, I got it now. All right, I'm gonna mute.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Noor Alif. I'm a senior engineer with Altech Environmental Consulting, with over 15 years of experience, 10 of which were in the regulatory world, and especially my former role as an industrial approvals engineer at Alberta Environment. Today, I'll be examining some key elements of a recent report, along with some industry-specific examples of the use of such reports. But before we get into that, I'd like to briefly mention who we are, what we do here at Altech. At Altech, we're a full-service engineering and consulting firm. We've been in business for 35 years and counting, since 1986, actually. Our parent company, Char Technologies, focuses mainly on the technology side by developing and deploying customized solutions in areas including pollution prevention, waste minimization, and water recycling. One of the other pillar of Char is the focus on low carbon energy by using advanced pyrolysis technology and other innovative processes. We support our clients by specializing in a variety of areas, including regulatory compliance, expert auditing and verification services, water and wastewater services, site investigation and remediation, just to name a few. You'll notice that I have highlighted the regulatory compliance here in green, and that's because the topic of today's discussion falls under the umbrella of regulatory compliance, which includes areas such as development of permits and approvals for air, noise, water, and waste, and environmental as well as OH&S compliance audits and other quarterly environmental reports, just to name a few. Let's look at a recent report here. What we do at Altech is we research all the federal, provincial, and municipal environmental regulatory changes every quarter. And after the comprehensive search, we then generate a site-specific report detailing the applicable regulatory changes and any proposed changes that may impact your plant and your environmental management system. So the makeup of the report itself consists of an executive summary. It's what you can see here on the slide. It highlights the key regulatory changes implemented or proposed here on the left column, and in the middle column it looks at the regulatory impacts of those regulatory changes or proposed changes, and on the far right column you'll see Altech's recommendations for each of those changes. Following the executive summary, the report has 3 sections of the body of the report itself, covering the federal, Ontario, and the municipal regulations in more detail. Here's an example of the federal section of the report. In this example, the federal government has posted a mandatory notice to submit risk management activities related to a particular substance known as perfluorohexane sulfonate. This chemical has been widely used in firefighting foams as surfactants, in metal plating, as well as in cleaning and other surface treatment products. These chemicals can cause serious health effects and are highly persistent in the environment. So how are you supposed to know if you're required to report under this notice? So what's happened in the past is the federal government has identified key stakeholders and commercial activities that are involved with specific substances through its phase 1 and phase 2 of the domestic substance list inventory updates, also known as DSLIU. So the impacted stakeholders should have already received an email from Environment Canada with information requests on specific quantity and use, as well as facility and customer information. So the recommendation here is pretty straightforward. If you have not received an email, but you have information to provide, you're requested to call the 1-800 number or send an email. Here's an example of the Ontario section. Here, there's a mandatory reporting of energy and water use that's coming for all buildings over 50,000 square feet. Currently, the province requires an energy and water use data for large commercial and apartment buildings over 250,000 square feet. But facilities should be aware that starting July 1st of 2023, the regulation will require all buildings at least 50,000 square feet to report on its water and energy use data. Here's another example of the Ontario section. in October of last year, the province proposed to amend regulations to streamline the permissions for combined heat and power systems, also known as CHPs. CHPs are basically systems that are energy efficient and that generates power and captures the excess heat to provide space heating or steam. And compared to conventional power and heat production systems, CHP systems offers better efficiency and reliability and can be used in a variety of facilities. And currently, the permissions for these systems are subject to different regulatory requirements, even though the risk level are similar in comparison to comparable technologies. So the proposal basically introduces a more uniform approach that aligns approval requirements with the level of risk while still ensuring the protection of human as well as environmental health. So as you can see here on the slide, the table highlights the proposed amendments. And for natural gas CHP systems, the proposed permission details are as follows. For systems under 500 kilowatts, they are exempt from an ECA requirement. For systems under 25 megawatts, they are ESR eligible. And obviously for larger systems greater than 25 megawatts, an ECA is still required. And you can see similarly the proposed permission details of the wood biomass CHP system shown here on the right. But in the interest of time, I will not discuss it here, but it is actually covered in detail in the quarterly reports. Here's another example of the Ontario section. In November of last year, the province proposed to add 5 new products to the Ontario Product and Appliance Energy Efficiency Regulation, also known as OREG 509, and primarily to set or update the test methods, as well as introduce minimum efficiency requirements to reduce energy and water use, as well as greenhouse gas emissions in the province. So the table here lists the 5 new products. On the left column, the data that the test method and the efficiency requirements are to come into force. You'll see here in the middle column, and Ontario's proposed compliance dates shown here on the right column. The 5 products, as you can see, they are commercial oil-fired furnaces, commercial air compressors, pre-rinse spray valves, portable air conditioners, as well as uninterruptible power supplies, also known as UPSs. So if the facility is using any of the 5 products, it must ensure compliance with the test method and the efficiency requirements by the proposed compliance dates shown here on the right. Looking at yet another example in the Ontario section, in December last year, the province posted a decision regarding extending the grandfathering for infrastructure projects and providing additional flexibility for excess soil reuse. Under the Environmental Protection Act, the ministry has finalized amendments to the following regulations. OREG 406, also known as On-Site and Excess Soil Management Regulation, OREG 153, known as the Records of Site Condition Regulation, and OREG 347, known as the General Waste Management Regulation. And these amendments were made in response to delays to infrastructure development projects and to support flexible reuse of excess soil. For example, one of the amendments of the On-Site and Excess Soil Management Regulation, the OREG 406, is really the exemption from the need to obtain an ECA for operations of a site that's temporarily storing excess soil, generated from greenfield or other low-risk level development sites. They're to be reused at a similar low-risk development site. So the recommendation here is that any facility planning new or continuing with an existing construction project that involves excess soil, they're encouraged to review and be aware of the full list of amendments in the regulation to ensure compliance. The final example shown here is the municipal environmental regulatory changes. And for this particular client, there are a few bylaws to be aware of related to water, wastewater, and stormwater, as well as a bylaw to regulate backflow prevention. So the recommendation is that the facility is encouraged to identify and implement water savings and wastewater discharge reduction opportunities. One of the areas my colleagues Osama and Andrew Friedenthal specializes in. Shifting gears a little, let's look at some examples of how these quarterly reports have benefited our clients. In this specific example on the slide, I'm referring to one of our valued clients in the steel industry. This client uses the quarterly reports to be aware of the upcoming changes to requirements, such as the diesel emission standards and equipment efficiencies for boilers, air compressors, UPSs, as mentioned in the Ontario section of the report a few slides ago. This client also uses the quarterly reports for their internal documents, really to plan for risks, opportunities, and actions. For example, you'll see a quote from here, that, and I'll just read the quote. For any expansion to our facility, we're aware that there have been changes to environmental assessment requirements, as well as excess soil regulations and potential delays to COVID, end quote. The quarterly reports also better equips this client to fulfill any compliance obligations, not only for those regulations that are applicable to them right now, but also for those that are not applicable to them at that time. For example, the Ontario Emission Performance Standard Program. But having these quarterly reports document these regulations is a good reference for the future should this client expand and trigger the need to participate or report. Here are two more examples. The first one is one of our valued clients in the manufacturing of plastic and rubber products. This client is actually unique in how they use Altech's quarterly reports. They take our comprehensive reports and they create further summaries of the changes and regulations. And then they use Altech's quarterly reports and their own summaries to assess, to further assess the potential impacts on operations and update their environmental programs as needed. And what they do then is they put forward the quarterly reports and the summaries to the management team at a semi-annual basis, to assess their EMS compliance. And in the second example, you can see on the slide here, this is one of our valued clients in the manufacturing of automobile electronic parts. This client uses Altech's quarterly reports to show legal compliance as part of their ISO 14001 requirements. And they also, the report helps them track any changes for continuous improvement, as well as reporting the changes to management at a semi-annual review. So, in summary, we've discussed the importance of consistent regulatory review as an essential piece of the EMS review. This would allow you to periodically check and adjust your programs. And I know audits were not a big part of the detailed discussion today, but an important element of the audit is the regulatory review, as alluded to by Walter. It serves a number of internal and external processes. So for example, the internal audit department that reports to management gives assurances that the business is run appropriately, meeting all environmental obligations. And then externally, you obviously have the auditing agency and the inspectors, but you also have your customers, really, that will go as far as potentially reviewing your regulatory issues and whether those issues were handled appropriately or not. And we also looked at a very high level what Altech's quarterly reports look like. And in the examples, we highlighted the value of consistent and timely regulatory reports for subscribing clients. Basically, in essence, these reports not only allow our clients to adhere to regulatory changes, but it also provides a proactive opportunity really for them to know what's coming down the pipeline and potentially shape some of those regulations, because you get the opportunity to comment on them during the proposal stage. That's all I have to share. I hope this has been an informative afternoon for all of you, and I'll now pass it on to John. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Noor. So I have some questions that came in, so I'll ask them, and they weren't any specific person. So Noor, you can comment first, and then Walter, you can jump in and give your opinion. Okay, the first question was, is there a specific EMS a company should have in order to mount a due diligence defense against prosecution in Ontario?
Okay, thank you for that question, John. I'll take a first crack at it, but I'll open up the floor to yourself and to Walter as well. To my knowledge, really, Environment Canada or MACP, they don't have a specific requirement for EMS. But what is necessary is having one that has the key elements, having the management oversight and the commitment, and the plan, due and check review, as mentioned by Walter. But John, I think having that legal background, you're probably equipped to add more to this.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It's my experience. I used to work at a law firm for a number of years as an in-house environmental engineer with a bunch of environmental lawyers. That's our experience as well, that you needed to have the elements of an EMS, but you didn't need to have an ISO 14001 EMS. And so there was no gold standard that you were held to, such as that. Okay, the next question is, we're kind of related to that. I think people are worried about getting in trouble. Can you get fined for not having an EMS or one that is not up to date?
I think these are suited questions for you more, but I believe the short answer is really no. But like I mentioned again, with your legal background, you could perhaps shed more light, John, on this one, because I think this has to do with the regulatory world, with the legal world rather more. Right.
Well, it's my experience. There's no particular statute or regulation specifically requiring an environmental management system. And if you look at the growth of environmental management systems, actually the driver is stakeholders, specifically companies that want their suppliers to have an EMS. And for some companies, some multinationals, it's easier for them in some respects to say in a blanket statement, oh, you need to have a ISO 14001 EMS because it's an international standard, it's an internationally recognized. And then if you drive around industrial parks, you see companies with banners making the claim, either they're ISO 9000 or which is just a management system, or ISO 14000. So they see that as almost as a marketing tool, that hey, we are an EMS company. But with respect to if you get a visit by the environmental field officer to do an inspection at your facility, they're not going to say, where's your EMS? They're going to go through the regulations. If you have an environmental compliance approval, take a look at that, but they're not going to say, where's your EMS? The EMS becomes an issue if you get charged and you have to go to court.
Yeah, John,
for an incident.
I just wanted to echo something you said earlier, and that that I've always referred to them as the new regulators, and that is the people in your supply chain, so your customers. They are the new regulators, and so they will often latch on to the ISO 14001 framework because that is out there. It's something that they can grab onto. but a company can serve itself well by developing an EMS internally and having that available to present, because it saves you a lot of what I would call questionnaire time with your customers. If you can show them that you have something in place and that you've got a process behind it, such as, taking all of that great information that Altech can give through their regulatory updates and show them how it feeds into your EMS system, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, next question is, what is better from your experience, having a separate EMS or incorporating the EMS into a broader management system framework? Nord, you want to start?
Sure, I can start, and then Walter, feel free to jump in. Thank you again for another excellent question. It really depends on the company, I believe. So the larger ones often tend to incorporate the EMS and the OHS, whereas the smaller ones may, have a tendency to have a separate EMS system. But I think the key really is to ensure that there's management buy-in and oversight, and that all elements are covered. Over to you, Walter.
Yeah, I think you see it's more the rule now rather than the exception that you have EH&S departments, and so your management systems are sort of folded into a larger group. That frankly ensures that there is a regular cadence, because there are regulated cadences in the health and safety side. I work for a very large company, and so everything fed into an overall enterprise risk assessment, right? And if it didn't sort of meet certain criteria, then it was known, it was being managed, it didn't need to be elevated any further. So it really depends on the company.
Okay, next question. For a smaller company, is there an easier EMS? Small companies always want the easy. Easier EMS, or are the elements all the same? You still need the same sort of thing. Nor, do you want to start with that?
So you got cut off a little bit at the
Oh,
end.
sorry. For a smaller company, oh, it says my internet connection is unstable. Thank you, Bell. Thank you, Bell Canada. For a smaller company, is there an easier EMS, or are the elements all the same? You still have to have all of the EMS components.
Okay. Yeah, another good question. So I think for really every company, regardless of size, I believe they should have an EMS. For a smaller company, the regulatory requirements will most likely be less onerous, but the key elements need to be there, and they need to be proven, that they're there through the paper trail. And really, I suggest, starting with the modest details, using the ISO 14001 as a framework. But the key is really to just get started. Anything to add, Walter or John, yourself?
I will say you don't know where you're going or where you need to go unless you know where you are. So it's getting that initial, baseline done. And that's knowing what regulations, what are the things that are nipping at your heels, and then how are you going to manage them? The EMS may be a very brief document for certain operations, but for larger manufacturers, yes, it's going to be, a larger document, but all of the elements are the same, just some may be NA for some operations.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And the key, based on my experiences at the law firm, is what Walter says, paper, that you have it written down. I know a small company, it's easier to know who does what because there's maybe 5 people, but you need to have it written down to show that you have evidence, because that's the key, right? It's one thing doing it, but having evidence that you are doing it and have done it and have looked at it. That's key. And I mean, you can take a look at the detail of what Weston did in the examples Walter gave. Okay, so Next question. This is a really hard question. It's like asking how long a piece of string is. How much time, money, and effort does it take to set up an EMS and to run it? So someone has time constraints, don't know who, I got bags of time, wants to know that question. So Nora, why don't we start with you and then Walter can jump in.
Yeah, that is a tough question. I think the way I would look at it really is the mindset should be that an EMS doesn't really cost, but rather pays off. And it may take some time and effort to get one started, and the company may need the assistance of a consultant ultimately. But the fact is, there are more pros for having an EMS than the cons. And for those folks that are evaluating the cost of starting an EMS in-house versus hiring a consultant, the difference is really variable, and it depends on your budget and if you have the staff available. An experienced consultant can certainly make the process go a lot quicker and smoother. And then choosing that consultant that's flexible and has done many of EMSs with reasonable fees is really the key to minimizing your costs. Over to Walter and John.
Yeah, I would agree. When we started building our program many moons ago, and I don't want to age myself, we certainly did rely on third parties, consultants to come in and perform their assessments, do their, identify our gaps. And then, we were large enough that we were able to internalize some of this work, but we would still periodically bring consultants back in order to vet that, that we ourselves weren't missing anything. So it's a valuable effort. From a time standpoint, you get a lot more identified quickly when you engage a third party, and there's value there. And it is for a company, you're asking for this. You're not being submitted to.
Mm-hmm.
It is not as stressful as you might think it could be.
Okay. Yeah, I just like to add, I mean, you can look at a whole bunch of examples where there's companies, for example, that did something wrong, like BP, that bragged for years that they were a green and environmental company. And then they had that disaster, and where was it? In the Gulf of Mexico, where billions of
You're back, John. I think
I know. No, what? Bell Canada, they're conspiring against me. Okay. Did we finish off that question? I think that was our last question, so the timing's perfect. Walter, did you want to add? You finished up the adding, and Nora, you finished? Okay.
No, we're good.
So go ahead.
No, we're good. I think, happy to address any questions that get put to you after this call.
Yes.
We're all about, sort of making sure that everybody's capabilities are raised in this area.
Exactly. And it's 1 o'clock, so that's perfect timing on the Q&A. The recording we'll put it up on our YouTube channel, and the slides will be made available to the participants. And I'd like to thank both Walter and Noor, and thank the audience for your patience and some of the glitches that we've had, for being with us, and stay tuned for follow-up webinars that we'll be hosting at CHAR and Altech. So have a great afternoon. I know it's a sunny day where I am, and enjoy it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.